Right, and that's important compared to Andy Cutler chelation, where the schedule is just not realistic for a lot of people.
Oh, it is not. And it's always the excuse for why something has gone wrong. It was that 1 3 a.m. dose you missed, and the whole thing fell apart.
Yeah, and then you have to stop and start over, and a lot of tears are shed. So moving into Andy Cutler chelation, what kind of flaws do you see with Andy Cutler chelation? Why do you feel this protocol is not?
It was a very engineer-developed thing. Andy was an engineer, maybe it might have been a chemical engineer. It's like process engineering. Everything's working the same way all the time. You set up this variable, that variable, it always works. These are humans, man. He once said that glutathione works the same for everybody. If it didn't, you'd all be dead. That's just not realistic. There's all of the SNP differences everybody has, and then the overlay of the epigenetic differences. In inflammation, these things are turned down. With antioxidants, they're turned up. This stuff's all over the place. And so the number one problem is thinking everybody's the same, and I just set up this equation where the chelator goes in and the mercury comes out. Now, what if there's other things that are supposed to support it that aren't working? Like, say, the transporters in the kidneys, MRP2 transporters, same ones that you have in the gallbladder, you have in the kidneys, and they're essential for moving the DMSA conjugates out. So if they're not working, then you're going to be in trouble. Now, the whole lack of respect for biochemistry was probably the number one problem. And he viewed mercury toxicity as something that's inevitable for everybody because there's no detoxification system for it. But that's ridiculous. I mean, in the 70s, they knew that glutathione and ultrametallothioneine were shuttling mercury out of the body all the time. And so I started by starting Cutler type protocol and getting my amalgams out and just getting myself sicker and sicker. And then I was watching a lot of functional medicine lectures about how the body's supposed to work. And I was like, wait a second, why am I forcing this all through my kidneys? Right. When I could be putting this through the liver GI? And liver and GI regenerate like mad. Kidneys do not. And so Cutler's using this two-part system. DMSA first, going through the kidneys with really no kidney support, ignoring the liver, ignoring the bile, ignoring glutathione levels, ignoring inflammation, ignoring transporters. And he starts with that, and then he moves on to adding in lipoic acid. Mm-hmm. And my whole approach is that detoxification looks like this. You got this cell. Up in the cell, mercury will be stuck onto some protein there. So to get it out of the system, you need glutathione. And he would always be like, but glutathione's a bad chelator. Like, you can't, you would cite some study where they'd have a piece of tissue and load it up with mercury, and then they'd soak it with glutathione, and it wouldn't take all the mercury off. But if you soaked it in DMPS or DMSA, it would take the mercury off. But that's not, that's for getting the whole mercury load off of a tissue in a couple hours by soaking it in a chelator. The way the body works is it's using glutathione, and it's using glutathione as transferase. This is a molecule that will take the mercury and redirect its bonds with the sulfur it's stuck to and push them towards the glutathione. So you end up with a mercury glutathione conjugate. Now you got to get that out of the body. Now you got a system of transporters. This is called phase 3. The linking is called phase 2 detox. The transport's phase 3. So you dump from the cell to the blood. Now you're circulating in the blood. Phase 3 continues at the liver, where you grab the conjugate, pull it into the hepatocyte. And then it finishes with dumping it through MRP2 out of the liver into the bile flow and into the GI. In the kidneys, you have the same transporters. OATP pulls it from the blood to the proximal tubule epithelial cells, and then MRP2 dumps it into the urinary flow. So that's how the system works. And it's an inducible system. You can turn up its activity with things that are called NRF2 activators, or things that encourage bile flow. All these things encourage that. You can turn up your glutathione levels, either with precursors or liposomal glutathione. So there's all these levers you can affect to move these toxins out. And at the same time, you're affecting lots of other synergistic toxins because you're turning up the reactions that move all toxins out of the body. All right, so he was just using DMSA and function and relying on the kidneys to get it out. Now, he didn't do any testing. He said none of the testing is reliable. So he was never testing blood levels and he was never testing urine levels. And he'd have you go through like 2 years of these cycles before you were supposed to feel better at all. Now, if your kidneys aren't working real well and you can't move those conjugates, you're going to be getting a lot of recirculation. Now, this is why he was going to that every 3-hour thing. So let's keep the levels of DMSA up so DMSA complexes are dominating the blood and are getting things down to the kidney. And, because any of these, even the glutathione, they'll hold on to the metal for a while. Eventually, it'll make its way off and do something else. So the every 3 hours was to keep these levels up and try to get everything down to the kidney. So his DMSA was to lower the blood levels. But who's going to get into the cells, into the tissues, and get the levels that are in the tissues out? And DMSA doesn't do that. DMSA doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. It doesn't cross the cell, across the cell membranes. And so you're reliant there on lowering your blood levels and getting your body to then redistribute and dump more out of the cells. And that's where the lipoic acid comes in. That's what lipoic acid does. When if you're measuring blood levels and you take high dosages of lipoic acid, you'll see the blood levels actually rise. And it rises in people who clear it out of their blood slow. So they're dumping from the cells to the blood faster than they're clearing. That's because lipoic acid is called an NRF2 upregulator. It interacts with a cell messenger that goes into the nucleus and turns up all the genes for detoxification. So all the glutathione synthesis genes, all the phase 2 and phase 3 genes, all get upregulated and the cells dump into the blood. This is actually why the system worked, assuming your kidneys work. So DMSA is lowering your blood levels. Then the lipoic acid goes and squeezes the tissue to move more out into the blood. Lipoic acid also does get across the blood-brain barrier, but it's also upregulating all that chemistry in there. In fact, along the blood-brain barrier, you have this huge concentration of the phase 2 and phase 3 detox transporters, and they're helping you move stuff out of your brain. He was saying that the DMSA, that the lipoic acid is actually a chelator, and there's very, very little evidence to support that, except this one paper called the Gregus paper that didn't directly support the lipoic acid being a chelator. Actually, if you know your chemistry really well, it supported all of this glutathione system upregulation. And at the lower dosages, it didn't redistribute all these metals, only at really high doses. So he wasn't bringing this up, but the doses that he cites to support his theory were the equivalent of you and I taking 14 grams of lipoic acid in a single dose. In reality, we're taking tens of milligrams. And at the lower dosages, it upregulated glutathione efflux out of the liver, and it upregulated both inorganic and methylmercury efflux out of the liver, just as any NRF2 upregulator would. At really high doses, it started dysregulating everything because the glutathione was all being used up to detoxify the lipoic acid, because lipoic acid is a mild toxin. So then you're using up the glutathione. The first thing that drops out of the picture is your methylmercury efflux. And so methylmercury efflux went down as the lipoic acid was sucking all the glutathione out of the liver. So if you know how to look at this paper, it still says that NRF2 upregulation is what glutathione does. But when it goes, is what lipoic acid does. But when you go to 14 grams, everything, all kinds of hell breaks loose. And that was really, the underpinning of everything he was talking about. But he never talked about liver support. He never talked about glutathione. He never talked about bioflow, about binders, about all these things that really bring the whole system together and enable you to get better in just a couple of months.